Teamwork isn't just nice to have in business, it's the undisputed competitive advantage. When your team members work as a unified force, your whole operation benefits through higher productivity, thriving creativity, and unstoppable momentum. Welcome to the Impactful Teamwork Podcast, where we share with you strategies and tactics to help you develop game-changing teams so that you and your business can make a real difference in the world. Welcome back, everyone, to this week's edition of Impactful Teamwork. My name's Julia Felton, and I'm going to be your host and guide for the next 20 minutes or so while we delve into an interesting subject that I really want to share with you, all about trust. But before we start, I just wanted to share a little story with you. Because as I record this, it is actually Burns Night. And I want to take you back to 14 years ago now. 14 years ago on Burns Night, it was a night pretty similar to tonight. Really blustery, blowy, cold, dank and dreary. And my friend Joe got a call and advised that there were 8 horses and ponies had been rescued from the M2 in Kent. And they were needing a home to go to until it could be decided what was happening with them. At the time, my friend Joe ran this horse rescue, and so the horses were transported to her place. Fast forward about 3 or 4 weeks later, Joe calls me up and she says, Julia, the weather has been awful. The fields are just so muddy. I've got very little space and I've got this herd of horses in that I've just rescued. Well, as luck would have it, I had been running my equine-facilitated leadership business for a couple of years at that point. And while I loved the horses that I had, Toby and Charlie, they were both male. And I'm also very aware of team dynamics and how you need to have a diversity in the team. And my team was all male at the time. So I'd been saying to the universe, wouldn't it be fun if we could get a couple of female horses, mares, into the herd? And when I spoke to Joe, she said, well, I've got these 2 mares and I'd like you to look after them. Now, because they were rescued on Burns Night, they had the names of Bracken and Thistle, obviously after the Scottish theme. The little stallion that had been in the herd was called Hamish. So I went along to retrieve these horses from the little herd. And they were really interesting. For any of you that have met Bracken and Thistle, you wouldn't recognize them today to what I encountered 14 years ago when I went to meet them. The ponies were probably about 9 months old at the time. They were tiny. They were so small they could fit in a stable together. Literally, they only came up to about here on me. They were that small. Emaciated, they really hadn't been well fed. And the only way to describe them actually is that their coats were like dreadlocks. So Bracken in particular, the fur on her body had become all matted together. So much so that you just couldn't brush through it. It was a bit like Rastafarian dreadlocks all over her. So I went out in the field to try and meet these ponies. I don't know what their history was and what had happened to them, but they were pretty terrified of humans. So it took quite a lot of time and energy, a good few hours, for me even to get close to the horses. But eventually Thistle was a little bit braver. She came up and we managed to catch her. And eventually, using the best techniques I know about advance and retreat with horses, we eventually managed to catch Bracken as well and transport them the short distance from Joe's yard to mine. And that's where the horses stayed. And many of you know, they're still with me today. 14 years later, I was given the opportunity after about 6 months to just adopt them because their owners didn't appear. But what I wanted to share with you was how I managed to build relationships with them, because particularly Bracken was very, very scared of people. And so I had to spend a lot of time nurturing that relationship. As leaders, we need to spend a large amount of our time nurturing relationships with our team members. So how did I nurture and build trust with Bracken? Well, the first thing I did was where I had her out in the field. I used to go out there every single day and just sit and read in the field. And the reason I did that is this is something I'd learned from one of my mentors, Carolyn Resnick, who works in America. Because in the wild, horses do two things. They hang out together doing something and they hang out together doing nothing. And yet in the human world, we often tend to hang out together doing something and we rarely hang out together doing nothing. So I just went out and sat in the field with Bracken and Thistle and just read a book and just spent time with them. And I did this for probably about 30 days. And eventually curiosity killed the cat. They started coming over to me and they were happy to be with me. So first lesson is I spent time developing the relationship. The second thing I did was any time that I wanted to walk up to the horses, I really became very, very conscious of reading their body language. And every time I tried to approach Bracken in particular, if she in any way indicated she didn't want me to move forward, I actually retreated. And these would be very, very nuanced. This might be her just shifting her weight slightly backwards. It might be her looking away from me. But anytime I did that, I respected the distance between us and stepped backwards. And that made her curious. Because how often in business do we walk into people's personal space and we're not really respectful of what their own personal boundaries are? I know that when I was in the corporate world, that was something I was pretty remiss at doing, actually. I was remiss at setting boundaries and also recognizing other people's boundaries. I was remiss at setting boundaries with my boss in that I kept letting him give me more and more work to the point that I nearly burnt out. And actually, it was a horse that taught me the benefits of setting boundaries. Because actually, when we set a boundary, everyone is really clear on what needs to happen. So, as I said, I actually learned about boundary setting from a horse when I was on an equine-facilitated leadership program as a participant. Because in my natural state to want to be liked, I wanted to be up with the horse, but the horse didn't always want to be with me. And the horse made it quite clear by walking off. But also by the same token, if you've got a large, half a ton, 750 kg of a horse coming next to you, you want him to be pretty respectful of your space. Otherwise, he might push you over. And what I learned from the horses were actually when we set boundaries, everyone feels happier and everyone feels safe because we know exactly what the rules of the game are. We know what's permissible and what's not. And with Bracken, that's what I was doing. I was showing her when it was okay, when she did start coming towards me, and when it wasn't. And actually, I'll share a story with you. You would have thought that after being in the corporate world with my boss, I would have learned the importance of setting boundaries. Fast forward a year or so, and Bracken became quite brazen and quite bold. Anyone that has met her will know that she's a super sociable pony and she loves being with people nowadays. In those early days, once I was so happy that she wanted to come up and be with me, I didn't set boundaries with her. Which, while she was small, was okay. But as she's starting to get bigger and chunkier, it wasn't safe. And actually, I had to go and reset boundaries with that pony. And I had to make it very, very clear what was her space and what was my space. And of course, the challenge is when we've not set boundaries up front with people, people are confused when we suddenly start implementing them. And that was the same with Bracken. So when I started saying, no, you need to stay away, she didn't understand. And actually, it took a huge amount of energy from me to reset those boundaries with her. In fact, I had to do everything within my power when I needed to set a boundary. Sometimes I had to use my coat to keep her out of my space. At one point, I even had to resort to a water pistol to show her what the boundaries were, because it just wasn't safe for her or for me in the longer term. Now, she's still not massively respectful of boundaries, but she's a lot better than she used to be. But there's a big lesson there for all of us in business about the importance of setting boundaries, both actually in a business context, in order to keep us safe so everyone knows what's going on. So why is it so important that we build trust with our team members? Well, trust is the bedrock on which everything happens. In Patrick Lencioni's The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, trust is the base element on which everything else functions. And without trust, nothing else happens. So Ken Blanchard has identified what he calls the ABCD of trust. And I just want to share those with you because I think that provides a great framework for what we can use in terms of building trust in the workplace going forward. So the A stands for able, and we've got to be able to demonstrate our capability and show to people that we are able to do the work that needs to be done. The B in the ABCD model is believable. You've got to act with integrity, honesty, and respect, and be very sincere and non-judgmental. So I had to be believable with Bracken. I had to do what I said I was going to do and keep those commitments that I said I was going to keep with her. So my commitment to her was to look after her and Thistle and keep them safe and bring them up to be good, solid citizens. So the B is believable. The C stands for connected. So we've got to show that we care about other people, that we listen, we're open, enthusiastic, and show an interest in them. So that's what I did with Bracken, was sharing what we call sharing territory. That was when I was sitting with her in the field. I was building that connection with her with no expectation about what might happen. So some days she didn't come up to me at all. Other days she might be curious and come up a bit. But I spent time investing and building that connection. And then the D is for dependable. So this is about maintaining reliability, doing what you say you're going to do when you said you were going to do it. So I had to be really dependable. I had to show her that I was going to feed and give her water every day and look after her, again, so that that could build trust with her. So these are really important concepts that we take back into the workplace. How can we demonstrate to our colleagues that we're able to do the job and we've got the right skill set? How can we demonstrate to them that we're believable and that we're acting with integrity and doing what we say we're going to do? How can we show we're connected and show that we value building a relationship with them, that we're prepared to be there and listen to them and be really empathetic about what they're going through? And this is one of the challenges with the remote working that's still and the hybrid working that we're experiencing at the moment, is that sometimes building this connection with team members is more challenging. And I talk a lot about us having to build conscious connections. You know, when people are working remotely, we actually have to recognize that we need to spend time building these relationships. Because when we used to all be in the office together, we could build the relationships almost, like I say, through osmosis, right? You know, you bump into somebody in the coffee room when you're making your morning coffee and you start having a chat with them and you find out a little bit about them and maybe what they were doing at the weekend. Now you know a little bit more information about them. Next time you see them, you could ask them something else to build on the conversation you previously had. But when we're all working remotely, sometimes we just try and get straight to business. And we don't spend time investing and building those relationships. So that C of connection is so, so important. And then the D is dependability. How can we show that we're reliable and we're going to do what we're going to do? How can you show your team members that you are reliable? And it's interesting. I wasn't aware of this concept of the ABCD, but it makes me think about a time that I was actually in Wyoming. I actually went to help gentle, which is get wild Mustangs accustomed to being with people. So I had a little wild Mustang for the week. His name was Cody. And he had just been rounded up off the plains. And every year in the US, the wild horses, or a selection of them, are rounded up and taken into captivity. And that's their way of trying to prevent an overrunning and an overpopulation of wild horses. Except for it's quite a cruel way in which the horses are all herded together, often by helicopters, and they're left in these tiny holding pens, and a lot of them end up going to slaughter. Well, Cody was one of the lucky ones. He actually got brought to a ranch, and a number of us went there to help gentle them so that they could become a good, solid citizen, and we could find somebody to adopt him and look after him. So I worked with him for a week, and this is one of the things I had to do. I had to be dependable. I had to show up each and every day, 2 or 3 times a day, and feed and water him. Just like Bracken, I had to spend time hanging out with him, getting to know him. I had to set boundaries and be really clear about what I needed to happen, when it needed to happen. And I had to show him that I had the skills and that I could understand and speak his language so I could connect with him. So I think this model, the ABC of building trust, is really important. And it's important in today's world more than ever. As I've already mentioned, trust is the foundational cornerstone of everything in business. And yet, the recent statistics that have just come out show that trust is deteriorating in the workplace really, really significantly. In 2022, the level of trust in your immediate manager was 46%. Shockingly, that has dropped to just 29% today. That's an incredible 17 percentage point drop. So I'm kind of curious why we're seeing such a drop in trust within the workplace. I think what's even more concerning is that trust in senior leaders is only at 32%. Amazingly, it's better. We're trusting our senior leaders more than we're trusting our immediate line bosses. But still, 2/3 of people don't trust the people they work with. What does that say for the environment that we're creating within our workplaces? To me, it says it's really toxic, and it really does explain some of the low levels of engagement that we have in many workplaces, and therefore why workplaces are not as productive and therefore as profitable as they could be, because there's just way too much distrust going on. So trust becomes a prerequisite that as managers we must embrace, because we get higher levels of employee engagement when we've got high levels of trust. We get higher levels of collaboration. We get higher levels of inclusion, and importantly, higher levels of talent development. In fact, in the latest Edelman Barometer of Trust, you're 11 times more likely to trust your manager if they support your development journey. If your manager gives you feedback, you're 9 times as likely to trust them. And if they're an effective coach, you're also 9 times more likely to trust them. So this talks to something that I've written about in my book, Unbridled Business, which was the incredible statistic that team members would rather receive negative feedback from a line manager than have no acknowledgement at all. Because at least when we got some negative feedback, we were feeling seen and valued and had some sense of belonging to the group. So for me, it just raises this question: does this lack of trust relate to this fact that people really don't feel they belong? And as a result, people are feeling more isolated within the workplace. I know in the case of Bracken and Thistle, if they hadn't felt safe with me, then they would have stayed away. And, that would have made my life really difficult. If they would just lived in a field and I wasn't able to catch them or work with them, I wouldn't be able to look after them. That horses need to be caught regularly to bring them into a stable, to get them out the awful weather. They need to come into a stable in order to see the farrier who does their feet every 6 weeks. This is why I need to be able to handle a horse. But also it's why we need to form relationships with our team members in order that we can work collaboratively and effectively together. So, as Burns Night comes to a close, I hope you just enjoyed that little story about Bracken and Thistle and what they've taught me about building trust within a relationship and how important it is. And when people come to our equine-facilitated leadership sessions, the first thing they need to do with the horse is build that level of trust. So I'd like to signpost you to a previous podcast I did on the diamond model of leadership. Because as a leader, you've always got to be paying attention to what's going on around you. In the case of Bracken there, I was needing to read the body language. I had to have a huge level of presence to what was going on, not just for me, but for her and for the environment around us. I also have to be really clear on the direction we want to go. If you're going to form a relationship with a horse, they want that clarity and certainty that you know what you're doing. And your team members as well need us to have that clarity and certainty about where we're going, the direction we're going in. I also needed to approach a relationship with Bracken and Thistle with the right energy. If I'd gone into the relationship, into the field going, like this, high energy. I sometimes refer to it as a bit like a sparkler. You know how a sparkler, the energy is going. That's a really dysfunctional energy. The horse gets confused. They're like, why have you got such high energy around me? I don't need it. So I needed to come in with a very much calmer energy in order to ground the horses. But it's the same with our energy in the workplace. How often do we see leaders firing off and getting really frustrated and shouting and screaming, particularly when chaos ensues? And that's one thing we need to be aware of. Often when things get a bit chaotic and we live in this world of uncertainty where there's a lot of things going on all the time. One of my mentors, June Gunter, says, don't throw energy at chaos, because if we do, things just explode and nothing happens. Actually, what we need to do in the chaos is ground ourselves and get really focused. And when we've got that much more controlled energy, then it's much easier to connect with other people. So I've got a great friend, and her energy is this really high energy, but it's really dysfunctional. It's really difficult to connect with her. And actually, it's really draining being around. So, for me to connect with her, I have to bring my energy down in order to help her lower her energy. And that's what I have to do with the horses as well. If their energy does, because they get frightened at any moment, get very high and very agitated, actually what I need to do is not mirror their crazy dysfunctional energy. I actually have to slow things down. And what I personally do in order to slow things down is breathe very deliberately, a concept called box breathing. And then finally, you need to show up to the horses as congruent. You need to be authentic. You need to be yourself. And exactly that's what our team members want. When we put on a mask in the workplace, our team members can figure it out. We might not think they know, but they do know. If you go and partner with a horse and you're actually scared and you pretend not to be, actually the horse finds that really disconcerting. He's like, why aren't you showing up in the way that your insides aren't matching your outside? You're pretending that you're confident and inside you're shaking like a leaf. So the horses really need and appreciate that authenticity. And that's what our team members want too. And in this environment in which we're working today, that means that requires leaders often to be vulnerable. I really don't know what we're going to do in this situation, but this is the next step and we're going to do that, and then we're going to see and recalibrate and try again. And that's what I had to do with Bracken particularly. I had to try things out. If they didn't work, I had to do a different approach. But every time I needed to effectively step into her shoes and see the world through her eyes. Here she is, a little pony being taken from where she had lived all of her life. She'd been moved from down by Kent up into Sussex. Thankfully, she was with a little friend. I don't know how long she'd known Thistle before they sort of came together, but I got a sense they had been together for a while. So she had some sense of belonging with somebody else. But apart from that, she didn't really have that much safety and security. And that's what she was looking for me to provide. And as a leader, that is what we need to provide for our team members. We need to provide for them that environment of safety and security. We do that through building trust and building psychological safety in the workplace. So this week, I'd love you to reflect on the story I've shared about Bracken and Thistle. Think about the ABCD of trust and how can you build those into your relationships so that you become a much more trustworthy leader. Because we need to reverse this trend. If only 29% of team members trust their immediate line manager and only 32% trust senior leaders, we've got a big problem. So what are you going to do today as a leader to start building trust with your team? Please do leave us a review on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, on our website, or wherever else you find the show. We love to hear from you, so please do get in touch if you have any comments or thoughts. And if you want to explore how you can use equine-facilitated leadership development, either for yourself personally in a one-on-one setting or for your team, then again, please do reach out to me at julia@businesshorsepower.com. I'd be happy to share with you how the power of the horses can transform you and transform your team. Okay, so until next time, have an amazing week. Thanks for listening to the Impactful Teamwork Podcast. Please stay tuned for future episodes and do subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating on your favourite platform. Recommendations are essential for attracting new listeners. Please follow us on social media at Julia Felton and at Business Horsepower. And if there are any topics you'd like us to cover on future episodes, please do let me know. Remember, you and your team are always making an impact. What impact will you make today?